Tensions between Russia and the United States have already erupted, and now the warnings are thunderous. Another line has been crossed, and it's raising fears of a far more dangerous escalation. Moscow now confronts Washington head-on, accusing the United States of illegal actions on the high seas. At the center of this confrontation, the oil tanker Marinera. Russia's foreign ministry issues a blunt demand: stop, immediately. Washington is urged to abandon what Moscow calls unlawful interference and return to the basic rules of international maritime navigation. In a strongly worded statement, the ministry said, "We call on Washington to resume compliance with the fundamental norms and principles of international maritime navigation and immediately cease its illegal actions against the Marinera and other vessels engaged in law-abiding activities on the high seas." The Foreign Ministry added, "We reiterate our demand that the U.S. ensure humane and dignified treatment of the Russian citizens comprising the tanker's crew, strictly observe their rights and interests, and create no obstacles to their prompt return to their homeland." The language is unmistakable, the patience thin. Moscow demands adherence to the rule of law and an end to what it labels illegal pressure.
This comes after another sharp warning issued on January 7th, a sign that Russia's message is hardening, not softening.
The confrontation is no longer theoretical, the lines are drawn, and the stakes are climbing fast. In a missive issued on January 7th, Russia broke its silence and formally condemned the U.S. seizure of the Russian-flagged oil tanker Marinera, calling it a blatant violation of international law and a direct challenge to its sovereignty.
The Russian Transport Ministry confirmed the vessel was captured, while the Foreign Ministry warned Washington that the operation flagrantly disregards the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, the international treaty guaranteeing freedom of navigation in global waters. Considering the incoming information regarding the presence of Russian citizens among the crew, we demand that the American side ensure their humane and dignified treatment, strictly respect their rights and interests, and not impede their speedy return to their homeland. Russian nationals are among the crew, the ministry stressed, and Moscow is watching every move closely. The message is unmistakable. Interference will not be tolerated. As global eyes turn to the North Atlantic, tensions are escalating, and the standoff between Washington and Moscow has entered a dangerously volatile chapter. In a high-stakes maritime showdown, the U.S. military confirmed it has seized control of a Russian-flagged oil tanker in the North Atlantic, an operation driven by alleged sanctions violations and carried out after weeks of silent surveillance and relentless pursuit across open seas. The vessel, MV Bella 1, also known as the Marinera, was seized under the authority of a warrant issued by a U.S. federal court, according to a statement by the U.S. Army's European Command. EUCOM said the tanker was intercepted after being tracked by the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Monroe, with the operation carried out in coordination with the U.S. Justice Department, the Department of Homeland Security, and the newly renamed Department of War, formerly known as the Department of Defense. The command confirmed the seizure took place in international waters in the North Atlantic. U.S. officials say the Marinera is part of a so-called shadow fleet used to transport oil for sanctioned states, including Venezuela, Russia, and Iran. The tanker had reportedly evaded earlier attempts by the U.S. Coast Guard to board it in December, while it was operating in the Caribbean, and later crossed into the Atlantic Ocean. According to Reuters, the ship had slipped through a broader U.S. maritime blockade, targeting vessels carrying sanctioned Venezuelan oil. U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth underscored the administration's stance in a social media post, writing that the blockade of sanctioned and illicit Venezuelan oil remains in full effect anywhere in the world. Two U.S. officials told Reuters that both the Coast Guard and the U.S. military were directly involved in Wednesday's seizure. Russian state broadcaster RT reported that American forces boarded the vessel using a helicopter, publishing images of the aircraft hovering above the tanker. RT cited an unnamed source who said the ship had been shadowed by a U.S. Coast Guard vessel for weeks, and that at least one earlier attempt to intercept it was disrupted by severe weather conditions. As the operation unfolded, marine traffic data showed the Marinera edging closer to Iceland's exclusive economic zone, heightening the stakes by the hour. Reuters later reported that a Russian submarine and a naval warship were operating nearby, an ominous backdrop to the seizure, even as both sides stopped short of direct confrontation. Speaking from Moscow, journalist Dmitry Medvedenko described the pursuit as a prolonged cat-and-mouse game, noting that there had been multiple failed attempts to seize the tanker in recent weeks. The Russian government has not confirmed whether it deployed naval assets to escort the vessel, but Russia's foreign ministry said it was closely monitoring the situation. The ministry, quoted by Russian state media, argued that the tanker was operating lawfully in international waters and accused the U.S. and NATO of paying disproportionate attention to what it described as a civil vessel. Moscow called on Western nations to respect freedom of navigation under international maritime law. The Marinera was sanctioned by Washington in 2024 for allegedly transporting oil on behalf of a company linked to Lebanon-based Hezbollah. U.S. authorities say the seizure is part of a wider crackdown ordered by President Donald Trump on vessels connected to Venezuelan oil exports. Separately, U.S. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem announced that American forces also seized a second vessel, the Panama-flagged supertanker M. Sophia, in international waters near the Caribbean. Reuters reported that the ship had departed Venezuelan waters earlier this year and was operating with its transponder turned off while carrying oil toward China. Reporting from Washington, Al Jazeera correspondent Kimberly Hallcat described the dual seizures as a significant escalation, saying they signal a coordinated effort to intercept and detain multiple sanctioned vessels operating far beyond U.S. territorial waters.
Just today, our forces not deployed to the Caribbean seized a boat, a sanctioned boat tied to the IRGC that tried to flee from us. That happened somewhere else. We are constantly involved in action. We have boats in the Mediterranean, we have ships in the Middle East, we have ships in the Indo-Pacific. These ships, if they weren't in the Caribbean, they'd be somewhere else conducting activity. Yeah. That's what the Navy does.
I want to emphasize that question from CNN. The question is never asked how much does it cost when they're in the Mediterranean or the Red Sea or the Indian Ocean or the Pacific. But now that they're in our hemisphere, on a counter-cartel mission or ensuring that an indicted individual comes to justice, now you're asking the question of cost. It's a disingenuous question to begin with. You're trying to find any angle possible to undermine the success of one of the most historic military missions the world has ever seen. The level of sophistication that Senate just was briefed on, and the House was briefed on, a classified level, is something only the United States of America can accomplish. The world is taking notice of that. Certainly Venezuela is taking notice of that. And it continues because two oil tankers, two overnight, were seized by the United States of America, stateless or sanctioned, because the oil blockade, the quarantine of oil out of unsanctioned or stateless, sanctioned or stateless vessels continues. That leverage will continue as Secretary Rubio outlined. So our military is prepared to continue this. As he said, the president, when he speaks, he means it. He's not messing around. We are an administration of action to advance our interests, and that is on full display. We're happy to brief the House.